This is the Lockpicker 1969, and welcome to my channel, and welcome to this next episode of Interview with a Lockpicker. Today's guest is TypeRegal. Say hello.
Hello.
So, how and when did you get into locksport?
So I started about 4 years-ish ago. Um, I was mainly on YouTube at first, kind of exploring the idea of lockpicking, kind of the ins and outs of it, and then because I was using Reddit a lot during that time, I was like, oh, I'm sure there's a subreddit for it. And of course I found it. And that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of kind of trying to find, things people thought were challenges, and then kind of setting those as long-term goals.
Okay. So, who would you say were your early influencers from Reddit and YouTube then?
So Reddit kind of as a whole, where you would get the different individuals posting, important milestones and, the starter milestones. And then kind of before that, I was mainly watching Bosnian Bill and Lockpicking Lawyer. And after I started to kind of pick up on the subtle hints that they were kind of focusing on that the magical maybe blue to purple range maximum, I was like, I feel like I can do better.
Okay. So, what would you say your focus really became with regard to lockpicking then? And why? And
So
why? Why?
sure. So my focus kind of became the going after the fun stuff, but fun in my book is more of like a um slightly irritating, and most people don't necessarily think it's fun and more like torture depending on the lock. I know that a lot of people back when I was going after it were going after or didn't want to even touch the ProTech or the ProTech 2. And I was like, oh, but those look like they're so fun. And everyone's like, fun? No.
Okay. So tell people about the ProTech 1 and 2.
So I started down a rabbit hole, kind of as I was getting up towards the black level locks, and I was looking at them, and I mean, this was back when Classic was a black level lock technically, with when picked with its own tool, which is no longer a thing. But so I was going after abloys that I was like, ooh, I really am interested in these abloys, and I remember hearing a lot about the ProTech 1, the ProTech 2. I had difficulty procuring a ProTech 2 for a little while, but I went after the ProTech 1, and I was one of the first, if not the first, to show the pick tip on YouTube. Um, and that was pretty fun. I know some people would argue that there's a hidden video somewhere in 2004 that was deleted or something, but um, as for that video, I cannot attest.
Okay. Um, when we talked before, you talked a little bit about cutaways. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I'm very big into uh, using cutaways to educate myself on a lock, develop a little bit of a muscle memory for at least feeling where the lock is fighting me, or how best to approach it. A lot of times having that at least visual map um, early on for me is very important for getting the feeling of the lock just right. I know for Distatainer, it was extremely hard for me to understand it because I made a homemade tool, and it was the Abloy Classic was the first one I was going after. So I had no idea the feeling I was looking for. no idea of the navigation skills that I needed, so I would have been completely flying blind if it weren't for the for using a cutaway to even get the tool right, because I wanted to make sure I could move the discs correctly and navigate and move around. And so that's kind of, I've moved now to using cutaways as kind of a way of both marking my progress through a lock and kind of being a important milestone, particularly for disc detainers, because they're fairly easy to do a 3D printed cutaway, and that's kind of the cutaway practices that I like. I like doing a 3D printed cutaway because one, they're not using a lock body, and two, they're not, or they're easy to switch out of and to prototype new solutions if you overcut or something.
Okay. Well, speaking of 3D printing, you mentioned to me before about picking tools and accessories for disc detainer.
Yeah, so I do the cutaways, which are mainly kind of my tool for picking. Um, and then I've done, I think, three different handles now, um, that are to some degree involved with 3D printing. I know my very first set was just a clamp on to the Abloy Classic, um, it was a clamp on set to the typical like Chinese crap picks, um, that you uh, kind of that it would literally just bolt together over the pick tips, and you could just get a little bit more tension on those. And I've kind of been trying to gradually progress up to, there was one that was a clamshell design that I basically could clamp it over the pieces so that it was practically entirely not using those handles necessarily, other than to apply that clamping force on the metal to metal interface,
Okay.
which seems to be one of the more important interfaces to make sure you have as much friction on, um, because some of the tensions you have to put on that, at least for the way I pick DD, I use quite a bit of tension.
Okay, so with the DD locks, you talked to me before about using spacers. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so spacers was the final type of tool that I use for disc detainers, and I'm sure that other people have used similar tools before me, but I started kind of uh, back. This was part of what I did with the Abloy Classic was I felt comfortable with a cutaway, um, but obviously I needed that visual feedback still, or I felt like I needed the visual feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to help me almost training wheels the lock, I modeled and 3D printed a spacer to put inside the normal lock body, not the cutaway, in order to give me more feedback on those discs, because what I was able to do was essentially create um, basically like a rotationally locked uh, disc, so that it's always on the open gate, and that way you remove two, three, four discs, and you get way more feedback on the rest of the disk. It amplifies that feedback and gives you the option to really kind of nail down that feedback, and then you can lessen that feedback, and you'll still feel it again as you progress to a thinner and thinner spacer. Then you can pick the whole one, and it's kind of like the progressive pinning
Yeah, that's what I was
for
just gonna
this
say. It
container.
sounds like you're doing a progressive, approach to learning the lock and being able to pick it with eventually without the spacers, I would imagine. So yeah,
Mhm,
okay, that makes sense.
mhm.
So go ahead.
I was just gonna say I've also done that kind of thing for the Miwa U9, which was everybody says don't disassemble that to that point. I did it. Um, I don't know how proud I am of doing that, but
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So I think this is something people are going to want to hear about because a lot of people try to progress through the whole belt ranking and everything. And if I remember correctly, you're a black belt Dan 2, correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes,
So can you tell us a little bit about your journey to getting to that?
sure. So I had started back around 2019. I progressed to black belt by 2020.
Wow.
Um, so well, I in 2020 I became black belt. And that was kind of after a few different um slugs through locks, attempting to kind of divert into other locks. So there were a few kind of ones I've put on the wayside as I made my way through. So I still have a small naughty list of locks to do. Um, but I progressed up to black belt, and I got essentially what everybody at least once deals with in LPU, which is the I'm done with locks for now. And so there's kind of like a natural hiatus that almost everybody at LPU has gone on at least once,
Sure.
where it's either black belts, it could be you finally got the red belt, brown belt, whatever it is. You get to a belt and you say, I don't want to see another lock for a bit, or, I just, you get decision fatigue
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
some kind of arthritis or something,
No,
and
for
you get
I mean
you back off of it.
for me it hit me at purple. I'm at purple and I've got so much other stuff to try and do between the channel and all my other interests in making picks and trying to get back to making challenge locks. So I definitely understand taking a break from the belt progression for a while. So very much understand that one.
Sure, and kind of as that after I got back from my kind of hiatus, I started to get focused in on the Dawn points as that next progression system. And that's I'm currently Dawn 2. I progressed from regular black belt to Dawn 1 to Dawn 2. Um, and that's a few different locks now that I've gotten through.
Very cool. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about it was what you do for a living.
Mhm. So I am a electrical engineer by education. I currently work in the power systems. I do planning. Essentially, I help a company in my area to enter data, lots and lots of data for their systems and to make sure that compliance is kept up with different ratings and different
Mm-hmm.
stations.
Yep. Okay. So you mentioned when we spoke before in the pre-interview about CAD and how you got into CAD.
Mhm.
Can you go into that
Sure.
a little bit?
Yeah. So this
Because I would
stems.
imagine that comes in very handy with the whole 3D printing and everything and designing your tools and spacers and all of those things. So,
Mhm. Certainly. So this stems from way back to my high school days, where I had joined a robotics team. Um, I don't know if you've heard of what is it? I think it's called First Robotics. Um, but they do a robotics competition. They are sponsored, I guess, to some degree, um, by SolidWorks. And so SolidWorks gives them licenses to use. And so I got trained on SolidWorks to be able to model these robots. And then
Cool.
from SolidWorks, I went into college where I developed more of a SolidWorks background and kind of more of a principled background in that degree.
Okay.
Kind of learning about very much fulfilling all of the dimensionality of a part, making sure there isn't any loose dimensions that you've just kind of placed there. Um, and then kind of after I got out of college, I realized, I don't want to be limited by somebody's vague threats in a user agreement that I want to have to,
Yeah.
read over. I have to be afraid of some level of, if I want to make my own things and
Yeah.
sell them at some point, I don't want to be limited by that. So
Yep.
I started to learn FreeCAD, and that's what I currently use. It's an open source software. Um, and that's very helpful. Uh, and so I do a lot of my modeling for that. I try to not use others' models, and the only reason because I say that is because I'm trying to build my own library of models.
Yeah. You don't want to deal with people claiming intellectual property rights, blah blah blah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I gotcha.
But mainly I use my own models for my own lock practice because of like I want to build that repertoire of building up my cat experience to help me with that. And kind of, I know that other people have made helpful tools in the community, and those
Hmm.
should definitely be appreciated. But I also I like to use my own stuff that I
Yep.
can tweak and mold and.
No, that makes sense.
Mhm.
Okay, so what do you like to do outside of Locksport?
So I do a good bit of 3D printing, just kind of generally. Although in recent years it's been very focused on Locksport. Um, Other than that, it's a lot of video games, some other hobby project. I know Bosnian Bill used to joke about crocheting, but I've also done that, done quite a bit of that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Um all right. So you told me a little something interesting cuz I asked you how you came up with your name. Can you
Mm.
explain that?
Yeah, so
Cuz that's a cool
a long time
story.
ago. Yeah, a long time ago, my family went on a vacation to Florida. And I had to be one of those kids at the time where I said, I will not just take a normal souvenir of, welcome to, St. Petersburg Beach or something.
Mhm.
And so we uh we went essentially antiquing for a day to find my souvenir for the vacation. And we happened upon an store that had a nice typewriter for a reasonable price. And that typewriter was the Regal. So or the Royal, I should say. And
Yep.
then
Yep.
uh, I was trying to find synonyms for it because I realized that in some places I think Type Royal had actually been already taken. So I tried to create a unique name. So I came up with Type Regal as kind of a synonym for the typewriter that was a royal typewriter.
Okay. And you've been that ever since.
Oh yes,
Okay.
try to keep that regular across different profiles.
Yep. So you shared an anecdote with me about work and locks. Do you mind sharing that with our audience?
uh, so the I think you're referencing the time that I absolutely scared my boss, or at least to some degree,
Yeah, I think so.
correct?
Yep.
hmm So we had a uh, we have this very complex lock system on our some of our stations. I don't want to go into too much detail at all.
Sure.
But essentially, he told me that it was. He's like, "Oh yeah, we have this really secure system," and he pulls out the key and he shows it to me. And then I think it was the next day or the day after I came in and showed him my key and the lock that I had that was pretty much the same. So I definitely he was kind of looking at me. I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to learn this one. He's like, oh, okay. Yeah, he was. I definitely find that people are slightly put off when you tell them, oh, that nice lock you got there. I'm I'm gunning for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and then they always look at you, sideways after that.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so last question. Was there ever in your locksport journey that aha moment that just really turned things around or changed things for you in how you then approached locksport or progressed?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say that I think kind of the two stages of that. I think the first one was my turning towards um, cutaways and spacers. I think spacers were a huge moment that kind of helped me to start to progress well on distantainers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and distantainers, my first two distantainers I made, I would probably say extremely sloppy cutaways of with a angle grinder. Um, and they passed, they worked, um, but they were nothing special. Um, and so when I finally kind of developed the chops to making the uh, 3D printed cutaways, that was kind of my next step in that progression because it changed kind of that blind uh, search in a brand new keyway into something that I could visually see the effect that I was having on a given lock
Mm-hmm.
very quickly.
Okay. Before we sign off, is there anything you'd like to tell our audience or say that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I mean, you can check out. I have a Thingiverse page. I keep up an Instagram. I keep up a YouTube. I don't necessarily post consistently on anything. I don't have a very great social media presence, but I do try to engage with people.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, if people are struggling trying to get files, people are struggling looking into a lock, I'm definitely here as a resource to talk to people, and I've done it before where I've adjusted a model to help somebody who is asking for one, so I can definitely do that again.
Okay. Great. So I wanted to say thank you, not just for the interview, but I know you're getting over a cold. Um, and you jumped in to help me out and filled in when I had somebody that wasn't able to make their interview. And I really, really appreciate that. You have no idea. Um, again, thank you very much for the interview. And this has been great. And I really enjoyed getting to know you as well.
Hmm. I really enjoyed the interview, and I appreciate my chance to talk.
You're a very interesting person. Um, all right. So if you tuned in and enjoyed this, thank you. And if you can hit like, that would be appreciated. If you are already a subscriber, thank you. If you are not yet a subscriber, please hit that subscribe button. Either way, hit the notification and turn on all so that you get notified of content like these interviews and my other content, as well as the giveaways and the drawing announcements for the giveaways. Thank you for tuning in and listening. Take care.